Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today, as promised, I have actor Kelly Ward joining me. He played Frank Thatcher in the episode The Violated, which I just covered recently. So please welcome Kelly Ward. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat with me and, by extension, all of our wonderful community, and more importantly to them, they're the Walton community. So you are a piece of that family, and you may not have even realized how large a family that is still.
It's pretty amazing. I'm a very small piece, to be sure, but it was a very proud accomplishment for me at the time, because I was maybe 21 years old when I was cast to do the episode. And to be honest with you, I don't remember a whole lot about it, and I haven't seen it. I don't believe I've seen it since it aired originally back in the late 70s. So
yeah, and of course we didn't have all those capacities to record.
No,
our work at the time. I'll send it to you so you can see it again if you feel so.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah,
I would love to see that, because that would be a nice walk down memory lane. I suspect I got cast, and I don't even really remember the details about auditioning. I don't remember auditioning, but I suspect I got cast because I had done a film for Lorimar, which produced the Waltons, called The Big Red One. It was a war picture that Samuel Fuller directed. I had shot that the previous year, and I know some of the production personnel had also fought in World War II, and so maybe there was a sympathetic vibe there.
And who cast that one? Because our show was cast by Pam Polifroni, who I know did a lot of casting for Lorimar. So I don't know if she also cast that, or if that's anywhere in the recollection.
I'm not really sure, because, to be honest with you, I didn't meet with a casting director. I got called to go in and meet with Samuel Fuller and Gene Corman. I met with the director and producer straight out of the gate. And I don't quite understand why that was, but that's how I recall things, at least. And that was an interesting audition.
Yeah.
For The Big Red One. It culminated in Sam Fuller asking me to turn around and show him my ass.
Was that part of what happened on screen?
Well, he had a very good reason.
Okay.
My blood ran cold for a minute there, because I didn't know what was going on. But as it turns out, he explained, I'm going to have 4 guys in fatigues, and I'll know their faces, but when they turn around, I want to know each individual guy's ass. That seemed to make sense. Okay.
So it wasn't to drop your pants, show me your ass.
No,
okay.
No. It was certainly not that. He had a very ready explanation, and apparently all of us who got cast got that explanation.
Wow. Maybe he didn't want too many of you to look exactly the same from behind, so he could tell who to give direction to.
It's true, and one of the finest cinematic moments in that film is a shot of all 4 of the four horsemen are backing away from an onslaught of German Wehrmacht as they're firing away in a Roman amphitheater. And so you have to know who's who from behind. The shot was nearly lost because the negative got scratched in development, but a Dutch documentarian who was shooting the film while we were shooting the film had it on 16 millimeter, and that's the shot that made it into the final cut.
Wow.
Yeah. So by miracle.
Yeah.
But, and so I did the Waltons and auditioned for the Waltons probably a year after we did that movie. And by then, I was desperate to grow my hair out. I do remember reporting to the set the first day and the hair and makeup people being very dismayed because coming from the theater, you don't change anything. You wait till the costumer and the designers have their say. So I showed up in long hair, and I was supposed to be a GI reporting back from boot or from the theater of operations or something. And they were a little put out with me because I had long hair and they had to cut my hair on the spot. But it was a pretty good haircut. So it worked out for me, and hopefully it worked out for them.
I think so. I hear a lot of comments about them saying that the Walton boys, didn't have regulation haircuts. And they were sort of like, how come that happened? How'd they get away with not having GI haircuts? And I don't know. Same thing. The girls got very, very glamorous in later seasons. And we did not have even remotely period haircuts. I said, I don't know why they let us get away with this. As one of the girls I know, I probably whined a lot because it's like, but I want to look pretty. And some of those hairdos aren't pretty. And they let me I'm like, why did they let me get away with it? If they put their foot down and said, no, I would have whined to myself, but I would have complied because that's what we do.
Yeah, you come from the theater. That's the ethic. You do what you're told. You have to fit the vision of the design team.
Yeah, it is much different when you come in for a single standalone show where you're like, I can't cut it or I'm not going to shave my head, whatever. And they can decide whether or not they want to hire you based on that. But once you're cast in a show, you kind of have to toe the line.
Yeah, you do. Absolutely.
So we got away with a lot. But you didn't. You had to get a haircut.
I did. And I remember being really abashed because when I looked at it at the time, I thought, oh my gosh, I probably should have gone out and been responsible and cut it to a GI standard. But I was not that diligent an artist at that time.
Well, and at the audition, they saw that your hair was longer, and that it is nice to hear that didn't preclude them from hiring you in the first place.
Presumably, yeah.
I was going to ask you if you recalled, and this could be part of the evolution, whether you did any particular, felt you had to do research about the character and being in the military, and because at only 2021, you didn't likely have that experience yourself as an actor. So how did you need to, having just gone through that experience on the Big Red One, or maybe you did research at that point? Where does that fall in?
Did research for the Big Red One, and we shot for 13 weeks, and we had a real kind of a baptism in fire working with Lee Marvin, who was himself a combat veteran, awarded the Purple Heart. He made 23 beach landings in the Pacific Theater. Something that is not generally known about him. I mean, he was a legitimate American patriot. He did not dodge his responsibility. He did it for real. He taught us how to break down our M1 Garands blindfolded, keep them neat and clean, ready to fire at all times. And there were simulated battles. So we got a real intense exposure to what it might have been like to go to war. Well, there's no, live ammunition flying around. We did have a lot of explosives, and we had squibs all over the place. So there was some verisimilitude there, and that was good. That was good background. And I don't feel like I did any additional research for the military aspect of the Violated, but I was newly married at the time. I'd only been married for about a year, and the subject matter of that episode was pretty intense and pretty progressive for its time. And I think I felt pretty close to what a husband would feel like if he found out that his wife had gone through that ordeal. I don't know if that registers on film, but it did resonate with me at the time. So I do remember that for sure.
That makes sense. Did you talk to your wife about it at all to get a female perspective, or because
Well, I did, and my wife went to a private girls' school that had there was a boys' private school that did a lot of events together, and there were times where she had to fend off a couple of guys who were a little forward. Not that it's anything close to what is portrayed in the episode, but she shared some experiences that were eye-opening and made me a little bit more sensitive to that, to a woman's dilemma in the world at that time, especially in that era, where, as the episode portrays, you are faced with a very heavy decision as to whether or not to come forward.
Yeah,
and that lasted until the 70s for sure, which is undoubtedly why the company decided to air that episode, because it was still very au courant.
Yeah. I was proud of the company for the subjects they tackled, and I think because I thought that I seem to remember there being a whole debate with the script because it actually says she was raped, and I think there might have been some back and forth with the network about whether the word rape could be used or whether the whole thing would just be alluded to. And I seem to remember Michael feeling very strongly, Michael Learned, about let's not water this down.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember the whole sequence of it, whether there was that was taken out or that was put in. But Michael had this some very strong scenes in there.
Yeah.
Defending Darcy's position. And I was kind of along for the ride because I watched it just recently to talk with the audience about it. And there's a whole scene where we first go to see Darcy and finally get her to sort of open up without naming names, to at least to us. And I found myself going, well, I said pretty much nothing in that scene. And I went, I'm just there. I get to participate. But it was really Michael and Antoinette that it was really kind of, and I was just there to react to it. And I was happy to be a fly on the wall to watch that dynamic. And then she goes to see the sheriff or the deputy and gets no satisfaction. And then when the actual villain, Son Slater, shows up and startles her and says, "Oh, I hear you've been talking about me and spreading rumors." I mean, she is one tough lady there talking, just taking him on. And it was nice to see Michael get that kind of material to work with. And I think if she'd had more of those types of things, she might have been more willing to stick around longer.
Yeah, no, that gave her a nice platform. And I remember her on the set between takes, more than when we were shooting, being a very dynamic presence. I enjoyed being around her, watching her work. She made a huge impression. But by that time, I think I knew the series pretty well, having been a fan of it. And it was just kind of magical to be in that world for even as brief a time as I spent there. It was pretty heady.
Cool. I was going to ask if you'd seen the show most people were aware of it, but whether it was their cup of tea and they watched it, I never necessarily knew.
No, it was extremely appealing to me. My dad's parents were from Montana, They grew up in a kind of a hard scrabble existence. And I could very much relate to the overall world of the Waltons because it just resonated for me. Having known what my grandparents went through in winters where it was 60 degrees below, and instead of drying your clothes, typically you take them out and then you shake the ice out of the clothes and they're dry in the wintertime. Or my grandfather going around the town telling everybody the generator's going off at 9:30, and it's just about 9:30, so you better get all your electrical needs taken care of because I'm turning the generator off. Those things. And it was a town where there was no fresh water. It had to be trucked in on a train. Fascinating life.
Definitely.
People make do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you also had the chance to work with Ralph Waite, who was another very dynamic presence on and off.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He struck me as being strong and silent. We didn't have a lot of exchanges between takes. And I don't know if that was your experience with him. It's a funny thing when you're a guest on a show. It can be a little lonely because there are relationships and dynamics already in place, and people can either choose to let you in, or it's never a situation where you're frozen out. But sometimes it's hard to break through those longstanding constructs of friends and relationships that have been built up over multiple seasons of a series. So coming in, it's a little tough finding your cardinal points. What's north, south, east, west here? Who am I going to bond with? Who can I approach to give me a little insight about the workings of the show? And it might be similar too for the directors and some of the, well, maybe not the crew, but some of the directors, because I think they rotate in as well. So,
true. That's very true. And you didn't get to work with very many of them. Usually, I would say the kids. We will forever be the kids.
Right.
That I think sometimes we were a little looser and easier. And I think it probably also Ralph, it depended. He was very, very complex and very, very deep, and he wasn't always real accessible even to us. But I think that was because of his own life and also the way he approached his work. And since you were doing a scene with him he has literally that morning gone and threatened this man and told him to get out of town or else.
Mm-hmm.
So as an actor prepares, that's no doubt his, part of his preparation of having come into that scene. He's just come from there, and now he's trying to stop you from going and making a huge mistake in your life with this shotgun you just grabbed.
Yeah.
So it could be that, to play the scene the way he wanted to, he was less likely to be laughing and joking between takes. If you've been working with Richard, Richard was a little more like he could be playing a prank one moment and the camera's rolling, he could be crying the next, So we sort of saw both sides of that dynamic as people. And, depending on the emotional demands of a scene, we might, I might be less accessible if I knew I had heavy emotional demands in a scene. So I think that is probably was a bit of a factor, but if we were around the kitchen table and goofing around, then Ralph could be as much of a cut up and telling, jokes and singing and, whatever.
Right. Yeah. It is an interesting dynamic. Insofar as I remember certain aspects of the story, and certainly that scene, there's certainly a different relationship that Ralph would have with his family than he would have with this other troubled young man. And yet the general rules would still apply in terms of don't make this mistake. That kind of guidance, which is kind of the plumb line for his character throughout the series.
Yeah, definitely. But he always gave you a lot to play off of. That I do remember. That you weren't
he had
in
a
a
great
vacuum.
presence.
Yeah.
Tremendous presence and a wonderful face.
Yeah.
The camera loved his face.
Yeah. But you held your own in that scene, for a young actor without the amount of experience that the two of them had. And then Antoinette, who, was very emotional because of this. But you didn't look like a rookie in there, I got to say.
Thanks.
You looked really very believable, very real. And there was a wonderful, you talked about how you kept you still look young. You've aged very well. And you had a youthful innocence, and you were very believable as sort of a country boy. And so all of that played in your favor. So there was more than there were just a lot of layers to it, which I loved about the way they wrote the show, the way the show was directed, and the casting that they did, because most directors will say most of directing is casting.
Sure is. As a director myself, I know that as well as I'm sure you do.
There isn't enough time to teach them to act.
You cast well, you make your life much, much easier.
I want to thank Kelly for joining me for part 1 of our conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please hit like and subscribe. I will be back with more with Kelly, more behind the scenes of the Waltons, more Ask Judy, and much, much more. Thanks for watching.